Praise be to Jesus Christ, and welcome to Catholic Forum. I'm Deacon Jim Thorndale. I'm your host for this evening. I want to welcome all those who are watching us listening to us on podcast, and those who might be joining us on public television. Tonight we have a very interesting conversation. It's really about stewardship, a disciple's response to that. And we know as Catholics that as many times we are called to give our time, our talent, and our money to the Lord. And it's an understanding of how we do that. But tonight I have a very interesting guest with me. I have Mark Morrow with me, who's with the Diocese of Grand Rapids, and he is with the Stewardship and Development. It's nice to have you here, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be
here. You know, we talk about stewardship and we talk about discipleship, but somehow we have to put those two together with a profound understanding of what it means to have both of those in conjunction with one another. But what I would like to do is, first of all, let our viewers understand where you came from and how did you get to this point of being director of that program?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's quite a story. I'll try to shorten what might be 20, 30 or more years of my own history, along with the collision, if you will, with the office.
Okay.
About 20 years ago, it was an interesting time in our church, and there was a real call from our bishops across the country to really challenge parishioners to a greater response. Some of it was motivated financially, but otherwise, the cry was really more that we don't, in our Catholic churches, our Catholic faith, teach people about what true stewardship is.
Right.
So the bishop's response to that was to write a pastoral letter, the first pastoral letter on stewardship. And it happened to be published at the same time that our bishop, then Bishop Rose, established the Office of Stewardship and Development here in the Diocese of Grand Rapids. And I was privileged enough to be the first director, so it was a real exciting time for the diocese, of course, in terms of stewardship, establishing the office in response to the bishop's teaching and hoping that somebody such as myself could help carry that out in the diocese. But for me personally, what was interesting, just in terms of my own faith journey, the whole teaching in that pastoral talked about one's response that in that place, that once we really believe and understand what our faith is, what are we challenged to do with that?
Absolutely.
As you know, we're not supposed to hide it under a bushel basket.
That's right.
We're supposed to act on it. So the bishop's pastoral went far and beyond just the financial aspect.
Okay.
It really challenges all of us to be good disciples of Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
So it was a very, very exciting time back then.
Let me ask you this, Mark. Born and raised a Catholic?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you're a cradle Catholic,
Absolutely.
as I am. Okay, and so this journey was really started. Probably your love for the Lord in the Catholic Church really came from your parents.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful.
Absolutely. And in fact, our family moved here because my father accepted a position at St. Mary's Hospital, and I know what motivated him. It was not so much a career, but it was a faith response. He was very, very mission-driven. But we grew up in a very Catholic family, but in a very, very strong and vibrant Catholic parish community as well.
Okay. Was that in Grand Rapids?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Southeast End, and I'm still privileged and proud to be a part of Immaculate Heart of Mary.
Oh, good
parish.
for you.
So
That's
parish
right.
you know well.
Yes, I was there also. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
So, what prepared you for this position? I mean, you're educated. So, what was the qualifications for this position?
Well, that, again, an interesting question because, and it ties in with the title of the office, it's Stewardship and Development. My background prior to coming to the work at the diocese was in the area of development or fundraising, as most people would know it.
Right.
So even in applying for the job, I was looking at the job description and I said, Stewardship and Development. Well, I know the development piece because that was my background prior to applying, but the stewardship piece, I didn't know anything about. I was not really taught growing up in even a Catholic parish and school what stewardship was all about. So I had to study and learn about it, and interestingly enough, I couldn't find much from the Catholic tradition on it, but what I learned, again, challenged me, and it really made sense of, as I say, as I leave that parking lot in church, what do I do with my life? And that's what that disciples' response is all about.
Right.
So I started learning, reading, but the other thing, there's wonderful national organizations. At that time, it was called the National Catholic Stewardship Conference, now called the International Catholic Stewardship Conference, which the Bishop Rose and the committee at that time, that was the first thing they did was send me to a national conference. And there I met, and I still have friends and colleagues that are in that world today that I think really did a great job of helping me, which in turn helped the diocese in working with parishes around the diocese on stewardship education activities.
Do our viewers a favor. Give us the understanding of just a slight definition of stewardship versus development.
Okay.
And what the difference is there, so we can have that clear understanding what we're talking about.
Okay. Well, most people know when you say fundraising, that's about raising money, generally for a nonprofit organization. And in a professional sense, that's what development is all about. It's about connecting a community need represented in that nonprofit with the interest of a donor to invest or to give back, a sense of philanthropy.
Okay.
And so there's techniques involved in that whole development process of identifying prospects and engaging them in the work of the nonprofit and so on.
Could I use Cathedral Square as one of those examples of that when we started to develop that?
Absolutely. There were development techniques in terms of leadership and volunteers to make calls, identifying prospects that we thought might be receptive to making a donation and investment in that.
Okay.
And that's very, very much a secular development or fundraising technique. But what's so different than stewardship, and that I think that we lose sight of so many times, first and foremost, our giving in the church should not be based on the nonprofit, in this case, the church's need to receive, as much as our individual faith response to look at all that I have. And whatever all that is, as you know, whether it's a widow's mite but how are we going to give back to God with increase? How are we going to do that?
Right.
In that process, that's what stewardship is about.
Yeah.
That prayerful reflection upon our blessings, and how are we going to give back, hopefully with abundance, in our time, talent, and treasure in all that we do.
Yes, that's a wonderful way to describe it. You know, I always said too that our stewardship or our tithing is really a bill due to God, because He has given us everything, and we owe that back to Him. Not that He needs the money.
No.
But it's our understanding that what we need to give to God is because of our love for Him. So now, how long have you been involved in this stewardship and development at the diocese level?
Well, again, the history of that office goes back now 20 years, and I've been in and around the stewardship office all of that time, both in terms of a full-time employee as well as twice as its interim director.
Okay.
And then in addition, I would say the rest of my career and my work is really working, and my primary role is working with churches in a variety of ways, capital stewardship campaigns and things like that. So I've been involved deeply now for over 20 years.
Will you be involved now with the CSA? Is that something you get involved in?
Yes,
the diocese?
absolutely. That Office of Stewardship and Development, I'd say one of my primary responsibilities is to be a team leader for a wonderful group of staff members at the diocese. And our responsibility is really to put the tools in place for the parishes to run their campaigns in their individual parishes. The Catholic Services Appeal is now in its 30th year, but it's the single largest fundraising effort, if you will, for all of the ministries we do in the church.
You know, we ran the video at our parish, and we saw the bishop speaking to us. And I hate to put a dollar and cents on it, but sometimes we need to have that solid understanding of what this is. What percentage of the funds for our diocese really comes out of CSA? I mean, how important is that to the diocese?
Oh, it's significant. It represents 80% or 80 cents of every dollar that's spent in the diocese, from everything from mundane things like that we don't like to talk about, but administration for legal, accounting, and that kind of thing. But I think the real important things that people realize, vocations, for instance, vocational training. The average cost of educating a seminarian today is in excess of $40,000, so, and everything in between. So that 80% it's really the lifeblood in terms of providing the support, the financial support for all of those ministries.
You know, Mark, you touched on an important thing about the young men in seminary. What portion is the seminarian expected to pay, if any, when they're in seminary? Is that totally funded by the diocese, or is there money comes from the families?
Well, I think it's I don't want to say negotiated, that's not quite the right word, but I think every individual is different. There are those individuals that are in a position to participate. But I would say there's no candidate that's turned down because of financial reasons. Our church, as you know, we're in such need of ordained ministers in our church, so I think we welcome them at all costs and try to provide that for them.
Amen. So as we go through this journey, when the development now, you're probably in projects right now for development for the Diocese of Grand Rapids. What's the most ongoing and pressing issue, you might say, when you're trying to start the development of some type?
Well, I think in our office there's, in addition to stewardship, education, the Catholic Services Appeal, there's also the Catholic Foundation of West Michigan, which is a kind of an unknown resource or asset. But I do think one of the biggest challenges in my office is still the whole notion of education of what stewardship really is.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, kind of come back to the Catholic Services Appeal in a very complimentary way for even your viewers to think of that, something that has happened year after year for over 30 years.
Yes.
We take it for granted, and we refer to it in the acronym, CSA, and people they forget about even what the purpose of that is.
Yeah.
But that appeal in and of itself represents individuals' opportunity to express, in stewardship, a giving back to God with increase. Because their contribution back, just think of the lives that it touched, both in the staff support, the resources to parishes, and all of the needy through Catholic Charities West Michigan and so on. So, and we lose sight of that. So I think fundamentally, I think one of the biggest challenges that I have in my office, is getting people to understand that truly is a part of their stewardship.
And it's a powerful part of the stewardship. While I was watching the video that was put on there, you see all the families that are helped out who are in need for food and shelter, clothing, and all these things that come through that CSA program that we don't see or don't think about.
That's right.
And it's really out of sight, out of mind for many of us. We put our money in, but we have no idea on where that's going. And you know, that brings up an interesting point that we talked about too prior to the show, was there's this notion that we Catholics are a little bit light in the donation basket on Sundays, that we're not as generous as other denominations. But how do you address that?
Let's again, it's a great question, and it is a fact. No matter what study, and again over the last 20 years of resources that I've seen, it would show that the Catholic parishioners or whatever participate. We're one of the lowest participation, generally in the range of, in terms of tithing, it's about 1.2%.
Yeah.
So it's easy to look at that and say, boy, how cheap we are or whatever. Now, again, my own experience in the parishes that I grew up, no, we weren't taught about tithing a proportion of our giving. But if you really stop and think about all of the great work the Catholic community has done, not only in Grand Rapids, but across the country and the world, through our educational system, the hospitals, the charitable work we do through Catholic Services Appeal and the like. And the other big thing that we do is that when we have a need, you mentioned Cathedral Square, we have a need, or in our parish we need to put an addition on or renovate, we do have a culture of coming together and being very generous through. So our stewardship in many ways financially is expressed through the capital stewardship campaigns that we accomplish year in and year out throughout our diocese.
So sometimes the collection basket is not the right barometer to judge how Catholics are doing and giving their money in stewardship. You know, I heard you've probably heard this before, a little quote I heard from a priest at a pulpit once say that he stood up there and he said, I have good news and bad news. And he said the good news is that we have enough money to fix the roof, we have enough money to paint the outside, we have enough money for the new carpeting. He said, but the bad news is the money is still in your wallets.
That's exactly
and so
right.
It's a really an understanding of we need to come together as Catholics, as men and women, and fulfill our stewardship to the church.
That's right.
So as you look at this now, what's the forecast for the Diocese of Grand Rapids? What is the forecast for the future of the Diocese of Grand Rapids as far as stewardship goes?
Well, I think that's, as you know, it's interesting that we're having this discussion tonight, with the day that our new bishop, David, was announced, and how exciting that is. And of course, out of respect for he and his office, that he won't come into his office until June. We don't know what direction and what priorities will be his. But I do know that even stepping away a bit from the bishop's office, I do know that I'd say the culture and the interest around stewardship in the parish runs pretty deep. I'd say a good number of our parishes have an ongoing stewardship committee. Many of our pastors are committed and supportive of those activities. And we're just coming off, interestingly enough, this past March, the most successful stewardship conference in terms of attendance.
Wonderful.
That we've had, I think, in the history of the office. So regardless, I think, of where Bishop David might be in terms of where he might want to go, I'd say the forecast is very, very strong, because it is now taken hold, and it's rooted, and it's actually a part of everyday life for many of our parishes.
Yeah. Let's just focus a little bit on the kids right now, too, with education in our Catholic schools. Does that fall under your prerogative in this also? Part of that for the schools? in the diocese?
Not in a direct way.
Okay.
Certainly, I'm a resource in the Stewardship and Development Office, and many times called to parishes or schools, and there is a development piece, if you will, that Catholic schools have, whether it's at the elementary level, and certainly our high schools are committed to.
Okay.
So my office is responsible for it, and I'm always a resource on call, if you will, on an as-needed basis.
So if say Catholic Central or West Catholic wanted to put in an addition to their school, would that be something that you would get involved with and try to do a development in something like that to raise the funds for that?
Typically, whether it's a parish or a school in that case that has a large capital project, what they normally would do is they'd go out and hire an outside consulting company, would be. So my office does not provide consulting services to run large campaigns. They're very, very intense.
I'm sure.
Very, very volunteer-rich an organization and so on. And they really need a steady hand, a skill set that my office, with the limited time and resources that we have, we just simply couldn't keep up with all of those campaigns.
Okay. So on a monthly basis, because this is really your ministry to the church,
right.
How much time do you spend in the stewardship and development area?
Well, I spend quite a bit of my time. In addition to the stewardship education and like the stewardship conference, I'd say we also have a wonderful group. We call it our stewardship networking group, which is an informal gathering 4 times a year of parish representatives.
Let me just interrupt you too. Who would that entail? Who would that involve?
That would involve many of it's open to anybody.
Okay.
The typical person that would attend that would be parish staff that are involved or interested in some way in stewardship education within the parish.
Within our diocese?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And parish volunteers that populate many of those stewardship committees.
Okay.
And they really function, as I look at it, almost like a diocesan stewardship committee. They're a great resource to me. I mean, I try my office to feed them, but I would tell you that they really, in fact, they're really the reason that conference was such a success.
Yes.
They're really a great, robust group of people. We publish a monthly communication that goes out to all of the parishes, which is just full of different small but very useful, seasonally timed educational pieces on stewardship that bulletin editors and parish staff can use, and that. And then the other big thing that our office does, and something else that we don't talk a lot about in our Catholic faith, and that is the whole idea of stewardship, but not just of your income, but of your assets as well.
Amen.
When we look at our estate plans, and I know this is something my wife and I went through 20 years ago, when we had to first draw up our will and all of that, you know, the whole notion of what portion are we setting aside in our estate, just like we're asked to do with our income. And again, that's something that I never heard growing up and I hadn't even thought about. So what we've been doing is offering to parishes the opportunity to come out and work with a pastor and finance counsel or whatever, and maybe with local professionals to give people the resources and answer questions about estate planning, end-of-life issues, and all of that. And certainly giving them the opportunity to be faithful in their estate plan, just as they've been faithful to their church on a weekly basis
and what
as well.
What a powerful thought that is, that we plan to give back in a greater proportion than we need, than God has given, not than what God has given us, but that we consciously think about what we need to give back to the Lord and to serve His church, even after we've left this earth.
That's it.
And to continue on for the kingdom.
That's right.
Wonderful. Let me ask you this too then. As you've grown in this office, and obviously you have, what are the most rewarding times that you have in your job with this?
Oh, I think, reflecting, there's 2 parts to my job, and I'll just tell you the one that I like more, but part of it is the organizational side. I do need to go to meetings down at Cathedral Square and participate as a staffer.
Sometimes that can be tedious.
Well, it is indeed, it is indeed. But just schedules, meetings, and that kind of thing. But now to answer the other part of my job, and that's the one that I like the most, is when I have the opportunity to get out and work directly with the pastors in the parishes. That's always been my first love. That's where, I mean, talk about faith in action. Not that it doesn't happen at Cathedral Square, that kind of thing, but the life of the church lived out through the parishes.
Exactly.
That's where I love to be.
And I'm sure the pastors are very receptive to you.
I've grown, I'm privileged. I still remember back when I first went into the office, I didn't know, I knew a few of the pastors. And I made it a point in that first couple of months to get out and meet with each of them for an hour or so, just to introduce myself and listen to them about what their expectations were of the office and the person. And I still, to this day, value the connections that I made now. Even though I may not see them every day or even every year, those relationships are strong.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
Talked even in this, preparing for this upcoming, or the current Catholic Services appeal, I talked with one of our pastors up in Hart. And I haven't talked to him for 5 years, but I'm telling you that relationship goes back to 20 years ago. So,
wonderful.
Yes, developed, and I hope I have the respect over this time.
You know, we look at this, and we know our priests are educated men. They've been through seminary. They're godly people, but they really have never been trained in financing, or how to really appeal to people in a public way for money. And you hate to be, so crass, but the church needs money.
Yep.
That's how we operate.
That's exactly
right. And I always say there's nothing wrong with the rich Christians. We need them. And rich Catholics, because they're philanthropists for our churches. But do you give some advice to pastors on how they can increase their stewardship at their parishes?
Yes, absolutely. Well, and that is the role of the office, is to provide those resources to staff, including the pastors. But there is a long history. In fact, there was a study done out of St. Meinrad's about just the fact of the lack of the curriculum, if you will, in seminaries. And the title of the study was The Reluctant Steward, because our pastors, theologically, they're given the tools and the resources to become that ordained pastor, but in terms of administration and finance and managing, which is a part of stewardship, but also teaching you and I, what is our response? What should our disciples' response be? No, they're given very few. So again, I think resources like the International Catholic Stewardship Conference, our own regional conference that we had here, several of our pastors participated in that. So that's a big, and they are receptive to receiving that.
Because I'm thinking of many pastors. I know they've been trained theologically to understand what it means to tithe and what it means to be stewards, but they've never really been trained to stand in front of people and really give them a good theological understanding at times of why we need to be stewards to our church. And I think that's a powerful, powerful ministry of anybody that can do that, because Catholics need to be grounded in the understanding of stewardship and discipleship. And that's part of the role that you're playing in this, I would assume.
Oh, absolutely. The two things that come to mind when I think about stewardship, the two principles I'd like to talk about is responsibility. Everybody knows that. So you and I are challenged and will be held accountable for what have we done, not what did we give away, but what have we done with the gifts? The garden, as Bishop Morneau would say, what have we done with the garden that God has given to us? So there's responsibility, and then the other big piece is that generosity. The generous heart and that response to all of the gifts that God has given, that's every bit. And you think about it in your own parish. How do people respond to things such as the annual appeal for the school or the CSA that comes up? A lot of questions, a lot of doubt. Where does the money go? And you need to ask, and we need to be accountable, no doubt about that, but where's that spirit of generosity? Where's that spirit of giving back? And that, again, that's why I say that's the biggest challenge in the office, is that formation of the individual to really understand and to move through that, even that faith conversion, to move them to that kind of giving.
And when you talk about that, Mark, many times people just hear the word generosity and they immediately think of cash. But generosity can be done in many ways. Is that true? I mean, our time and our talents, the time we spend in our parishes, and the time we invest in our parishes, and the talents that we have that God's given us are equally as important as the money He's given us.
Oh,
because they really edify an entire parish, that we can raise a parish up to be a family and a community. So I want to be clear with the people that it's not just about money. And as you said, it's really that threefold: our time, talent, and our money that really become an essence of that. So as we journey through this, and the diocese is growing in this, and you're going to have a new bishop to work with soon. What are your expectations? Any expectations coming up for you?
Oh, well, I think that in any one of those areas that we talked about, including the foundation, there is the potential to have a full-time team working on each and every one of those. It would be my hope that that office and its responsibility would continue to grow, not necessarily in staff, but continue to be an even greater resource in each of those areas.
Right. Okay.
I would like to have somebody just full-time that does nothing but focus on the parish, the stewardship education, devoted to that, working with the pastors and the stewardship committees.
Is that something that you can bring to the diocese to see if that's possible?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's always a possibility. And again, we'll defer to his leadership and the direction that he'd like to take that. I think there might be a real opportunity for that.
Yeah.
The Catholic Foundation of West Michigan, again, for those listening may have never heard of it. What is the Catholic Foundation of West Michigan? That goes back about 18 years, but was formed with a collection of educational endowment funds held by the diocese for parish schools, but they formalized it under what's called the Catholic Foundation of West Michigan.
Okay.
And that initial $1.8 million back then has now grown to over $40 million, representing primarily funds held permanently in endowment, but for parishes and schools and parish name funds. Interesting, in a recent publication, it's the 14th largest private foundation in West Michigan.
That's amazing.
And it represents all of our Catholic ministries. So there again, what would be my hope? I think certainly getting the word out about that and teaching people about that we have those kind of funds that will be forever giving back to future parish schools and ministries in the future.
You know, Mark, I wish you were more enthusiastic about this job. It's amazing to see how involved you are in this. And, you know, God knows who we need in these positions. And he certainly put someone in this position who has the enthusiasm, the talent, from what I can see, to do this. And, you know, it's a blessing that we have you in our diocese to help this. And I know you've been instrumental with Bishop Rose, and you've helped probably Bishop Britt, and now we're going to go into our new bishop. So I really want to thank you for being here tonight. It's been a pleasure to be with you, Mark. You've enlightened many of us on what's going on in the diocese, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, great. Well,
Deacon,
thank you.
As always, I want to say praise be to Jesus Christ for all of us here, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.